The billionaire tycoon was living the high life until his birthday party froze in place. Music cut, guests stared, and every whisper died. Two small voices pushed through the wall of designer suits and glittering dresses. Two 5-year-old twins, clothes worn thin, cheeks flushed from the cold outside. They stopped at the center of the polished marble floor, looking straight at the man everyone else feared to approach. And then, without hesitation, they called him one word no one expected to hear: Dad. Silence thickened, eyes widened, and the celebration twisted into something else entirely. Before that night, the world knew Marcus Hale as the billionaire tycoon who built Hale Urban Dynamics from a cramped dorm room in Chicago. But the story doesn't begin with him. It begins miles away in a small, aging apartment on the south side of Brooklyn, where a quiet resolve shaped the life of someone far more familiar with struggle than luxury. Her name was Elena Ward, a 27-year-old single mother who worked 3 jobs and still counted every dollar with the same careful respect her father once taught her. She had been raised by a city bus mechanic and a home health aide, 2 people who lived paycheck to paycheck, yet carried themselves with a steady dignity. From them, she inherited the belief that guided every part of her life: stand tall, even when you're tired. It wasn't a phrase she said out loud often, but it echoed in her mind whenever she had to choose between rest and survival. Elena had been on her own since she was 22, raising her twins, Noah and Nia, with nothing but determination and a weekly envelope of carefully budgeted cash. She was the kind of person who knew exactly what $6.25 could buy: 2 subway rides and a small cup of black coffee if she skipped cream. That number lived in her purse, written on a fading sticky note, tucked behind a grocery store rewards card. It wasn't just money. It was her reminder that she was still standing, still trying. Their neighborhood was full of cracked sidewalks, crowded laundromats, and corner stores that knew her children by name. Every morning, she bundled them up and walked them to the public preschool 3 blocks away, leaving them with hugs that lasted a second too long. Then she would rush to her first shift at a small diner, where tap water was free and customers left tips that ranged from generous to cruel. Her evenings were spent cleaning offices in Midtown, wiping the fingerprints of people who earned more in an hour than she made in a week. Elena didn't dream of wealth. She dreamed of stability: a working heater in winter, a fridge that stayed full, a future for her kids without fear attached to it. And though she rarely let herself think of the man who had walked out before the twins were born, she carried the weight of that silence every day. But life has a way of circling back, and on one unexpected night, the worlds of Marcus Hale and Elena Ward were about to collide in a way neither could have prepared for. Elena's fragile hope arrived in the form of a last-minute catering shift, one she wasn't supposed to get, one she couldn't afford to refuse. The manager at the Midtown diner had pulled her aside that morning, slipping her a handwritten address for an upscale event in Manhattan, a private birthday celebration for some high-profile business figure. The pay was triple her usual hourly rate, and more importantly, it was enough to cover 2 weeks of childcare and a past-due utility bill if everything went well. But the risk was enormous. She had already begged her neighbor, Mrs. Grant, to watch the twins overnight. She had promised them she'd be back before they woke, even though she wasn't sure she would. The subway rides, the uniform she had to borrow, the long hours, everything hinged on this one shift going right. If she messed up, she wouldn't just lose a job. She'd lose the manager's trust. She'd lose a rare chance to stabilize the month. And if anything went wrong, if she showed up late, spilled a tray, or offended the wrong wealthy guest, there would be no second chance. For Elena Ward, this wasn't just a shift. It was survival stitched together by hope. The moment Elena stepped into the penthouse venue, she felt the air shift. Thin, cold, and shaped by wealth she had only ever cleaned up after. Crystal glasses lined the tables. Soft-lit chandeliers glowed like suspended moons. Everything shimmered, even the guests. She kept her eyes down, whispering her family creed under her breath. Stand tall, even when you're tired. Her job was simple: serve drinks, stay invisible, leave with enough money to breathe again. But invisibility doesn't last long around people who think the world bends for them. Near the center of the room, a young executive in a navy suit snapped his fingers at her. "Hey, refills, sparkling, not tap," he said without looking at her face. When she returned with the tray, he leaned back, smirking. "You're new. Try not to screw anything up." She swallowed the instinct to respond. Her moment of humiliation came minutes later. She moved through the crowd, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, when someone brushed her shoulder, lightly, but enough. The tray tilted. A single glass toppled. It didn't even break, just clinked against the polished floor. But that sound was enough to turn heads. A woman in a silver dress gasped dramatically. "Unbelievable," she said loudly. "Who hired her?" Elena bent to pick up the fallen glass, cheeks burning. Before she could stand, the event supervisor, a man who had only spoken to her once, rushed over. "What happened?" The executive pointed at her without hesitation. "She bumped into me, nearly spilled everything." It was a lie. He hadn't even been near her. But in a room full of wealth, the truth weighed less than appearance. The supervisor's jaw tightened as he grabbed her elbow and pulled her aside. "One mistake I can overlook," he said quietly. "But causing a scene at a private event? This is unacceptable." "I didn't," she started. He cut her off. "I can't have clients complaining. You need to go. I'll mark you down as unavailable for the rest of the month." Her stomach dropped. Losing the shift meant losing the money. Losing the month meant losing everything she had managed to hold together. She tried again. "Please, I didn't touch him. Just give me one more chance." But the decision was already made. Her badge was taken. Her shift ended before it even began. And as she was told to use the service elevator on her way out, Elena felt her fragile hope collapse under the weight of someone else's lie, while the party continued without noticing her disappearance. Marcus Hale had never fully enjoyed birthday parties, not even ones thrown in his honor. Too many people pretending to adore him. Too many investors disguised as friends. Too many conversations built on what they wanted from him instead of who he was. Still, he played his part, smiling, shaking hands, letting the night unfold around him like another well-funded performance. From the balcony where he stood with a glass of aged whiskey, he watched the crowd with the detached ease of someone used to owning every room he entered. He wasn't paying attention to the servers. He rarely did. They drifted like moving furniture, always there, always silent. But one movement caught his eye. Near the dessert display, he noticed a woman being led away by the supervisor. Not escorted, removed. Her shoulders were tense, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the carpet, as if looking up would make her smaller. The supervisor held her arm with an urgency that didn't match the calm rhythm of the celebration. The executive who had pointed at her was smirking, lifting a fresh flute of sparkling water, as if he had won a small prize. Marcus didn't know what happened, but he recognized the tone when the supervisor hissed a reprimand. He had heard it his entire life, at board meetings, in his father's office, from the private school headmaster who taught him that money makes some people loud and others invisible. He watched the woman, Elena, try to explain, watched the supervisor dismiss her, watched her remove her badge with shaking fingers. Marcus had the power to intervene, He knew it. He also knew the politics of his own parties. Don't interfere with staff management. Don't question the event coordinator. Don't break the delicate social choreography of wealth. So he didn't move. He simply stood there, telling himself it wasn't his problem, that he didn't need to involve himself in something irrelevant to the evening schedule. Rich people often told themselves comforting lies to justify their stillness. But when the service elevator doors closed behind her, Marcus felt a faint, unwelcome tug in his chest. A reminder, brief and unwanted, of what it looked like when a person without power was blamed for something they didn't do. He exhaled sharply, turning back to his guests, sealing off the thought. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story, and he fully believed he would never see her again. He was wrong. Elena stepped out of the service elevator into the alley behind the tower, the cold night slicing through her thin uniform. Her breath shook as she pulled out her cracked phone, calculating how long it would take to get home, how she would explain the rent delay, what she could cut from next week's groceries. She whispered her creed again. Stand tall, even when you're tired. But tonight, it felt like a phrase meant for someone stronger. Inside, the party rolled on, at least until Marcus Hale's executive, Evan Lorne, the same man who had lied about her, decided to add insult to injury. Near the bar, a guest asked why a server had been removed. Evan laughed loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause. She couldn't handle a tray, he bragged. You know how it is. Some people aren't built for real responsibility. Marcus heard it. He didn't like the tone. He liked the smugness even less. Another guest chimed in. Didn't she almost spill champagne on you? That, Evan said, raising his glass, would have been the highlight of her career. Laughter rippled, and something in Marcus snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. He walked toward Evan, stopping just close enough that conversations around them softened into silence. Repeat that? Marcus asked, voice quiet but unmistakably firm. Evan blinked, unsure if this was a joke. Just saying the staff needs better screening. You lied, Marcus said flatly. I saw the hallway angle from the balcony. You weren't touched. A few guests shifted awkwardly. Evan swallowed. Sir, it was just a correction, Marcus said. It was a lie told to humiliate someone who couldn't defend herself in this room. The crowd grew still. At parties like his, public embarrassment was rare and unforgettable. Marcus lifted a hand, signaling to the supervisor across the room. Bring her back. The supervisor hesitated, pale. Sir, she already... Bring her back. Every syllable cut clean. Minutes later, Elena stepped back into the penthouse, escorted through a sea of staring strangers. Her heart pounded. She expected another reprimand, not this, whatever this was. Marcus turned to her, his posture straight, his voice steady. You did nothing wrong. You are reinstated for the evening, and he gestured at Evan, owes you an apology. Evan's face was red, his jaw tense. I apologize. It was forced, insincere, but public. The moment wasn't kindness. It wasn't charity. It was defiance, unexpected, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. And for the first time that night, Elena stood a little taller. The intervention should have ended the moment, but wealthy rooms never let tension settle quietly. As soon as Elena resumed carrying trays, a new presence entered the space, one far more intimidating than Evan Lorne's smugness. Richard Hale, Marcus's father, had arrived late. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, wrapped in an overcoat tailored to broadcast authority. He stepped into the party like a man checking the temperature of an empire he believed he still owned. He spotted Marcus immediately. Why is the room whispering? Richard asked, voice low, displeased. Marcus braced himself, handled a situation with one of the staff. Richard followed his son's gaze to Elena, who stood near the dessert table, steadying a tray with practiced control. His expression hardened. You made a spectacle in your own home over her? It wasn't a spectacle, Marcus replied. It was a lie corrected. Richard's jaw tightened. You cannot afford to look soft. You host CEOs, investors, partners. If they think you're ruled by emotion. I'm not, Marcus said sharply. Richard leaned closer, voice cold. You undermined your own management. Over a server. One mistake like that can shake confidence in a company our family built. Marcus exhaled slowly. She didn't make a mistake, but Richard wasn't listening. His eyes were on Elena, assessing her with the same clinical calculation he reserved for quarterly reports. In his world, people were assets or liabilities, nothing in between. She shouldn't be here, Richard said flatly. Send her home. Quietly. Protect your reputation before this becomes gossip. Elena overheard. She wasn't close, but loud wealth tends to carry. Her chest tightened, a familiar humiliation creeping in. She stepped forward, voice steady, even as her palms shook. Sir, I'm just doing my job. I didn't want trouble. Richard's gaze snapped to her, cold and dismissive. Your job is to stay invisible. Marcus stepped between them before he realized he had moved. Enough. The single word struck harder than a shout. The party around them silenced again. Richard stared at him, stunned. You're choosing a worker's pride over your standing? I'm choosing integrity, Marcus answered. Something you taught me when it was convenient. It was the closest he had ever come to defying his father publicly. Guests watched, unsure whose side to take. Richard shook his head slowly. This is why I worry about the future of this company. Too much heart, not enough discipline. Elena's fingers tightened around her tray, but her voice remained even. I don't need defending, she said quietly. Just fairness. The clash of values, power versus dignity, wealth versus truth, hung in the air like an exposed wire. Richard stepped back, lips thin, conceding only to avoid a large. But the damage was done. Lines had been drawn, and nothing about the night felt simple anymore. When the confrontation dissolved into uneasy silence, the party tried to stitch itself back together. Music resumed. Laughter rose again, forced, brittle, laced with curiosity. But Elena could feel the weight of every glance that skimmed over her. She steadied herself, breathing in slow, controlled intervals as she moved toward the back hallway to regroup. She wasn't expecting footsteps behind her. Marcus appeared a moment later, pausing a few feet away, as if unsure whether approaching her was welcome. The hallway was narrow and dimmer than the ballroom, the only quiet corner left in the penthouse. Elena, right? He asked softly. She didn't answer immediately. If you came to fire me again, at least let me finish the hour. A flash of guilt crossed his face. That's not why I'm here. She folded her arms, protective. Then why? Marcus hesitated, choosing his words. I wanted to make sure you were okay. What happened out there, it shouldn't have happened. Elena let out a short, humorless breath. People like me deal with things like that every day. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it avoidable either, she shot back. And I don't need you swooping in to rescue me in front of a crowd. It makes everything worse. Marcus looked genuinely confused. I wasn't rescuing you. I was correcting a lie. Same thing, she said, just dressed up in a nicer suit. He blinked, taken aback. You think I did it for show? I think you did it for your image, she replied, because rich men don't like looking complicit. Her words hit him harder than she intended, but she didn't apologize. She was too tired, too humiliated, too raw from being dragged in and out of invisibility like a prop. Marcus spoke more quietly now. You deserved fairness, not charity. And yet charity is what everyone thinks it was, she said. Your father, your guests, even that supervisor. They don't see me as someone with a life outside these walls. They see me as someone who should disappear unless needed. Marcus swallowed. I didn't mean to make you feel small, she finished. You didn't. They did. You just put a spotlight on it. Her honesty unsettled him. Wealth had insulated him from seeing his actions through another person's eyes. Now, standing in that hallway, he felt it clearly. Elena, he said, tell me what you want. She met his gaze, tired but unbroken. To do my job without becoming a lesson, a spectacle, or a headline. That's all. He nodded slowly. And for the first time that night, Marcus Hale understood that dignity wasn't something he could give her. It was something she refused to let anyone take. Elena tried to fade back into the rhythm of the job, but just as she reached for a fresh tray, the event supervisor hurried toward her again, this time with a stiff, apologetic stiffness that didn't match his earlier tone. Ward, he said, clearing his throat, Mr. Hale has requested you specifically for the main presentation portion. He wants one server stationed near the stage, and he chose you. Elena froze. Why? He didn't answer, only gestured toward the front of the room. It's his event. She hated how those 4 words carried the weight of a command. But losing the shift wasn't an option. So she nodded, set the tray down, and walked back toward the ballroom, toward the last person she wanted to work beside. Marcus stood near the stage, adjusting notes on a sleek tablet. When he saw her approach, he gave a small, almost tentative nod. Thank you for agreeing to stay. I didn't agree, she reminded him. Your supervisor volunteered me. Still, he said quietly, I appreciate it. The next hour forced them into an uneasy partnership. The caterers set up stations, lighting technicians adjusted fixtures, and guests shifted their attention toward the stage where Marcus was preparing to give his annual vision speech, a reputation-defining moment, usually flawless in its execution. Elena's task was simple but crucial. Manage the refreshments and timing cues from the side platform where the VIP guests gathered. She would be standing directly beside Marcus for nearly the entire segment, a fact neither of them seemed entirely comfortable with. As they worked in proximity, their conversations were clipped, practical. Water or sparkling for the board members, she asked. Sparkling, he replied, but tap for the mayor. He prefers it when he's trying to look relatable. She raised an eyebrow. That's ironic. Deeply, Marcus admitted. They continued in this awkward, practical dance, passing materials, adjusting placements, coordinating timing. With every exchange, the friction eased just slightly. At one point, Elena noticed Marcus rubbing his temple. You okay? She asked before she could stop herself. Just a headache, he said. Too many conversations about money disguised as birthday wishes. Elena couldn't help it. She laughed. Just once, short and real. Must be exhausting, being celebrated. He glanced at her, and something softened. You'd be surprised. Despite their earlier clash, neither could deny the effectiveness of working together. Elena's calm precision balanced the pressure of the moment. Marcus's instructions grew gentler, more considerate. For 2 people from opposite worlds, it was the first time they moved in the same rhythm. Not friends, not allies, just 2 people surviving the same room for different reasons. A partnership neither wanted, but both needed. The turning point arrived quietly, not with confrontation or noise, but with an overheard sentence spoken carelessly by someone who thought their world was the only one that mattered. Marcus had finished his speech, the room applauding with polished enthusiasm. Elena stood at the side of the stage, resetting glasses, when a pair of executives drifted nearby, close enough for their voices to slip through the air between her and Marcus. "Poor girl," one murmured, tilting his head toward Elena. "Can't imagine living like that. Must be miserable." The other replied with a shrug. "People like her don't know misery. They're used to it." The words didn't hit her like an insult. They hit her like a reminder. A reminder of how easily people with money talked about people without it, as if their pain was a distant rumor, as if their humanity had been traded somewhere along the way. She kept working. She'd spent her whole life working through disrespect. But Marcus heard it too. He turned, eyes narrowing, not at the men, but at the idea that their words reflected a culture he had benefited from, a culture he was part of, a culture that had humiliated her earlier and justified it without hesitation. Something twisted in his chest. "That bother you?" Elena asked softly, noticing his expression. Marcus hesitated. For once, he didn't have a polished answer. "It should have bothered me earlier, before tonight." Elena nodded, wiping down a tray. "It's easier not to see things when you don't have to live with them." He watched her for a long moment, her posture straight, her movements efficient, her pride intact despite the night she'd had. She wasn't fragile, she wasn't meek. She was surviving with a strength he didn't understand. "When I was a kid," Marcus said, voice lower, "my father told me that emotions were liabilities, that taking responsibility for someone else's pain meant ending up weak." Elena paused, her hands stilling. "And you believed?" Marcus exhaled. "I think I built my entire life around it." There was no accusation in her gaze, only recognition. "I grew up learning the opposite," she said. "My dad used to say, 'Stand tall, even when you're tired.' He meant, don't let the world shrink you, even when you're outnumbered, even when people think they own space you deserve to stand in." Marcus absorbed the phrase like a truth he had never been allowed to hear. "Your father sounds like a better man than mine." "He tried," she said quietly, "even when he didn't have much to give." They looked at each other, not as billionaire and server, not as adversaries from earlier in the night, but as two people raised with different creeds that had trapped them in different cages. Marcus trapped by expectation, Elena trapped by circumstance, both exhausted from holding themselves together in worlds that demanded too much. For the first time, they understood each other. Not completely, but enough. Enough for something to shift. Enough for respect to take root. Enough for the night to change course in ways neither could predict. The party reached its final hour, the air thick with luxury and empty compliments. Elena moved through the crowd with the same steady rhythm, until a sudden commotion near the entrance pulled every gaze forward. Evan Lorne, still stinging from earlier humiliation, had cornered a junior server, berating him loudly for a delay in service. The boy looked barely 19, pale and trembling as Evan's voice rose high enough to bounce off the marble floors. "For the last time," Evan snapped, "if you people can't handle basic tasks, you don't belong here." The phrase "you people" hung heavy. Guests turned, some uncomfortable, some entertained. Elena froze. Marcus didn't. He stepped forward, voice calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. "Evan, that's enough." Evan spun around. "Sir, I'm just maintaining standards." "No," Marcus said, louder this time, the room falling silent. You're mistreating staff because you think their jobs make them disposable. Whispers rippled. Marcus continued, the only embarrassment here tonight is your behavior, not theirs. The young server blinked in shock. Elena watched, heart pounding. It wasn't charity this time. It wasn't guilt. It was a decision, made openly, without hesitation. When the final guests drifted out and the music went quiet, the penthouse felt strangely hollow, less like a palace and more like a place where too many truths had been spoken. Elena gathered her things, relieved the night was ending, ready to return to the only world that ever truly belonged to her. Marcus approached her near the service elevator, the same place she had been sent away from hours earlier. Only now, the air felt different, not tense, not pitying, just steady, a reversal of power, a public acknowledgement of dignity. And a truth spoken in a room that rarely welcomed it. When the final guests drifted out and the music went quiet, the penthouse felt strangely hollow, less like a palace and more like a place where too many truths had been spoken. Elena gathered her things, relieved the night was ending, ready to return to the only world that ever truly belonged to her. Marcus approached her near the service elevator, the same place she had been sent away from hours earlier. Only now, the air felt different, not tense, not pitying, just steady. You did well tonight, he said. I just did my job, she replied, and you did it with more dignity than most people in this room. She didn't answer. Compliments didn't pay bills, and praise from wealthy men rarely carried weight. But his tone held sincerity, not performance. As the elevator doors opened, Marcus hesitated. If there's ever anything Hale Urban Dynamics can do to support your work opportunities, you can contact me directly. Not just access you've earned. Elena considered this, not a rescue, not an apology. A doorway she could walk through or ignore. A choice, not a command. She nodded once. Thank you. The ride down was quiet, humming softly as it lowered her from marble and chandeliers back to concrete and streetlights. When she stepped out into the cold Brooklyn morning hours later, the sky was beginning to lighten. Mrs. Grant waited at her apartment door, twins in pajamas clinging sleepily to her legs. "Mommy!" they cried, running into Elena's arms. She pulled them close, Noah and Nia, warm and real, and the only judgment that mattered. They didn't ask about spilled champagne or wealthy cruelty. They didn't know anything about the party. All they cared about was that she came home. As she locked the door behind them, her gaze fell on the sticky note taped beside the light switch, the faded reminder of $6.25, and the creed beneath it, stand tall, even when you're tired. Tonight, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a truth she had carried into a world that tried to silence her, and won. Far across the city, in a penthouse now empty, Marcus Hale stood alone on his balcony, replaying the night's events. For the first time, he questioned not his image, but his legacy. Two worlds touched for a single night, both changed in quiet ways, not through wealth, not through power, but through courage spoken in small, steady acts. And sometimes, that was enough. Some stories don't end with grand triumphs or perfect justice. Some end with small, steady truths. Two people from opposite worlds learning that dignity isn't bought and courage doesn't need applause. Elena returned home stronger than she left, and Marcus faced a mirror he'd avoided for years. Their lives didn't merge, but their paths changed because of one night, one choice, one act of quiet defiance. If this story made you pause, made you feel something, or reminded you of your own strength, stay with us. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next one.